This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked, locked, blissed. Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USAPrepares.com. We're delighted you're here, broadcasting 2 hours from high atop the Missouri Ozark Mountains. There's a link to all of your instructors on the website, USAPrepares.com. Converging threats are confronted daily, right here, by your instructors. I'm Vincent Finelli. Aaron is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. Dr. Julie Penick is with us this morning. And Dr. Penick, we're delighted you're here. Welcome.
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm going to try to make a reasonable attempt at being a substitute for Dr. Sheely.
You know, Dr. Penick, you have been to many of our Get Prepared Expos. And I'd like to share with the class that when you are there, your seminar room is packed, and you are not allowed to leave when the seminar is over. Your students, your students crowd around you, and they have so many questions. So it's delightful being with you on the broadcast. I want to share something that happened last night and yesterday afternoon. We have listeners all over, and some of them have figured out where we live. And so a man came to our farm, and he said, he was telling me about his medical history. And he was saying that he was a veteran, a U.S. Navy veteran. And he was describing the runaround that he gets from the Veterans Administration medical staff and the hospital here in Missouri. And he told me that he has a stomach aneurysm. And this aneurysm, he's been told, is very, very serious, and it's growing. And all he needs is a 20-minute procedure to put a stent in there and just up through one of his veins in his leg, and he'll be good to go in no time. But without this relatively simple procedure, in terms of comparing that to a knee surgery or knee replacement or heart surgery, it's relatively simple. And he's getting the runaround by, we have to check more, we have to investigate more, we have to do more tests, and they just keep postponing and postponing and postponing. Can you tell us what an aneurysm is generically? Because there are all kinds of aneurysms.
Yeah, and when he says a stomach aneurysm, I'm wondering if he's somewhat confused as to what he has, because that's a term I'm not familiar with. He may be talking about an abdominal aneurysm.
That's what he's saying. Sure.
Okay.
That's what he's saying.
And so, and when we talk in terms of abdominal aneurysms, we're talking about abdominal aortic aneurysms. And so that's the only abdominal type aneurysm that I'm aware of. And I don't think that's a simple 20-minute fix. It's a little more complicated than that scenario that was presented to you. So I don't know if the veteran doesn't have a clear understanding of that, if it's not being properly communicated to him. But if in fact the term is conveying an abdominal aortic aneurysm, then that is something that is to be followed up at frequent intervals to see the size, because an aneurysm is an outbulging or a weakening of an arterial wall, if you will. And so it becomes a weak spot in the artery. And when we're talking about the abdominal aorta, the aorta is the biggest artery that leaves the heart and carries oxygenated blood down from the ascending aorta, which takes off the top of the heart, and then goes to the thoracic aorta, which is the part of that big, huge artery that's in the thoracic portion of the trunk of the body, and then extends down into the abdominal portion of the trunk of the body, and that's what I think he's referring to as an abdominal aortic aneurysm. That's pretty serious. It needs to be followed up appropriately to check whether or not it's growing. And that is something that requires, unless things have changed in the last year since I lectured on that, it's more than a simple 20-minute procedure. It's a surgical procedure. They can go in and put a patch graft over it to strengthen that portion of the wall of the artery. That's a great proactive thing to do. A reactive thing to do is wait till it ruptures and then hope somebody makes it into the emergency room and out of the emergency room to the operating room table and then off the table. And so I lost my brother last year to an ascending aortic aneurysm that ruptured. And he was fortunate enough to make it out of the emergency room and off the operating room table, which probably shouldn't have happened, and live for another 4 days to be able to visit with family before it ruptured again. And so you must think when that you have an outbulging of that arterial wall, think about if you blow a balloon up and let it down and blow a balloon up and let it down and blow a balloon up and let it down, eventually that elasticity begins to weaken, and you can get outbulging of the shape of the balloon, if you will. And if you blow it up again after several times of doing that, then one of those weakened spots is going to blow out when you blow the balloon up too much. And so that's the same thing that's going on in the artery. Now let's talk a little bit about the reported runaround that he's getting. I suspect that what he's being caught up in is the challenges that the bureaucratic Veterans Administration system is a part of, right? And so I worked in the VA hospital system for 15 years in the early part of my career, and there's nothing that I enjoyed more than to be able to serve the veteran population. I felt it was an honor to be able to take care of them, and the paycheck was just a bonus. So I want to thank all the veterans listening for their service to our country. But I will tell you that the system is fraught with, and the last time I worked in the VA system was 20 years ago, but I did 15 years before we moved to this area. And so at that time I was in middle-level management positions, and it is a complex system that all governmental agencies are subject to, budgets and having to look at how you spend the money, and then afraid that if you don't use all your budget this year, you'll get less budget next year, and then so you spend money on things that you don't necessarily have to have at the end of the year, because if you don't spend it next year, you're not going to get the same amount of money. Now, that's a silly notion, isn't it? Because if you didn't need it this year, then you most likely won't need it next year. But I found that to be true across several type of settings. If you had a budget that you had been approved for, and whether or not you actually needed it to provide the services to the veterans, you were encouraged to spend it before the end of the fiscal year in order to be able to maintain the same level of funding for the following year. The other thing I found is because it's a bureaucratic system and it's a governmental bureaucratic system, there's so many layers that you have to go through. I learned very quickly as a manager in that system, it was far better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. If I needed a piece of equipment and it either wasn't in my budget or it was going to take forever to order, but here's an example. I need an automatic blood pressure cuff in my intensive care unit I was the manager over. We had a brand new intensive care unit that was going to be open, but it wasn't funded. But they had 10 automatic blood pressure cuffs sitting on bedside tables in those rooms in that intensive care unit that wasn't going to be open for a year. You don't think I let those sit up there in those empty rooms, do you? I brought them down to my unit and used them. I got in trouble for that because it wasn't on my equipment list. But my patients needed them. They belonged to the VA, and they were sitting there not being used. And so I needed them. Now, there are some more sophisticated ways to measure blood pressure closely. Now they put arterial lines in. Actually, that was an option then, but it's more expensive. It was more expensive and higher risk. And so blood pressure is something that the patient that you talked about who has an abdominal aortic aneurysm, oftentimes there are big shifts and problems in regulating blood pressure in the post-op after those people have had that surgery. So you have to monitor their blood pressure. in every 2 to 3 to 5 minute increments sometimes and adjust medication drip rates to keep their blood pressure in a certain range, because the last thing you want to do is have their blood pressure shoot out and blow out the patch you just put on that artery, right? And so that's the challenge that people face in the VA system. And I saw some of those challenges of a bureaucratic system back, over 2 decades ago when I was in management in a governmental agency. What frightens me is to think that the VA healthcare system is the model for which I think may very well end up being the model for healthcare delivery in this country. They're steadily pushing us further towards a single payer environment, and they're pushing you to governmental subsidies. I have some, I'm not going to mention any names, but I have some colleagues who are very excited to be able to get health insurance through the healthcare.gov website. And they, because of their income, because they both retired young, they retired before they were 60, but because of their income is low, because they haven't started dipping into their retirement monies necessarily, they were able to qualify for health care. And not only were they able to qualify for health care, but they got subsidized, and they don't have to pay anything for their health care coverage. Now, I'm happy for my friends. But what challenges me to think about that scenario is this. Because so much of that is going on, what is going to happen is the reimbursement structure that they thought was going to be there when all these young, healthy people were going to pay premiums for health care that they were never going to need to use, because the young, healthy people don't ever really have to use their health care, is not going to be there, because those people aren't necessarily signing up. And you have folks like my friends who are older individuals who they're relatively healthy but would have certainly more need to use their health care services than a younger person. And they're going to find that there's not the money to pay for those services. And so what I think is going to happen is that system is going to crumble or collapse, or certainly bow under the heavy weight. And then the third-party payer system is going to diminish to almost a single-party payer system with, Medicare is one of the biggest third-party payers already in the country, and that's a government-run program. The VA system is a government-run hospital healthcare system, because VA has outpatient facilities and inpatient facilities. And when I look at the troubles that plague the Medicare system and the Veterans Health Administration system, and I think that would be the level of services that are going to be provided to everybody in this country, people were concerned about rationing of health care. Wait till they see what happens. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Julie Penick's with us, PenickHealthcare.com. She and I will be right back. We're talking about the Veterans Administration. I'd like to share with you what happened with my mom and Medicare when we come back. Dr. Julie Penick's with us, PenickHealthcare.com. There's a link to Dr. Penick's website at usaprepares.com, page 1, right at the bottom with the faculty. And Dr. Penick, I wanted to share this with you. Yesterday, we got a call here at the farm. My mom, 91 years old, lives with us and is certainly part of the family. And so when someone goes to a doctor's appointment, the family goes. It's a family adventure. And we want to make sure that we all know what the answer is, what's being discussed. And so that if there's something that we as a family need to do to help a member of our family, we all want to know what it is. We all want to hear it firsthand. So it's like a convention in the in the examination room with the entire family. And so my mom got a call yesterday from the hospital saying they just wanted to, it was a nurse, and she wanted to interview my mom for Medicare purposes. It was a survey for Medicare. And, naturally, we are not interested in providing any more information about anything to the government. I mean, literally, we don't want to do it. So we asked the question, what is this about? Well, it's just a few questions. Okay, and what is it for? Well, it's just for Medicare. And why? Well, it's the annual survey. It's standard. And so we're not interested in participating. And we very gently told the hospital, well, we'll talk about it with Vincent's mother, and we'll let you know. But we don't think we want to do it. Can you talk about these kinds of surveys. What are your thoughts? The questions that are asked on some of them by nurses. Have you ever felt like hurting yourself? Have you ever felt angry?
Let me talk about the whole issue in the broad perspective, and then we can talk about the individual questions. Okay.
Sure.
So all of this goes to this national agenda and the push for electronic health records, because the agenda is to collect data on the population at large, right? And the purposes for that is to do comparative effectiveness research. I teach this type course in a master's nursing program. And the goal of comparative effectiveness research is what they determined is if you were an 82-year-old senior with a cardiovascular disease problem and you lived in Miami, Florida, the cost of your care down there was perhaps 4 times the same for the same services as it was if you were the same demographic individual living in the Midwest, with no difference in healthcare outcomes. But down in Florida, maybe the specialist down there decided to do lots of extra things that the person in the Midwest decided that the physician or the provider in the Midwest didn't really think that they needed to run all this test or do all that extra stuff. And so we know that the healthcare system in this country is on the verge of collapse because it costs so much of the gross national product, correct? We have one of the highest GNP costs of healthcare on the globe, yet our healthcare outcomes rank, I think the last time I saw, about 47th in the world. Now, if you could name 46 countries that have a healthcare system that's organized fairly well at all, and to know that 48 of those people have better outcomes than we have here in the United States, when we pride ourselves on saying that we have the most sophisticated, technologically advanced healthcare system in the world, shame on us. Because we don't deliver care in a cost-effective fashion. We deliver care in a medical legal because we have such litigation in this country. A lot of those extra things that aren't necessarily necessary are ordered so that the provider doesn't want anybody to come back and say they didn't do everything that was humanly possible. And so there's this whole national agenda push for electronic health records because they want to compile data on different populations of care, patients and the care that they receive, so they can determine what's the best care. And appointed through not the bill that was passed when President Obama became president, but the legislation, the House bill that was passed before that, actually made way for this Center for Effectiveness. It's not a governmental, per se, department like the Department of Health and Human Services, but it is a governmental entity. And they actually are collecting all this data, and they are going to be using that data to decide what is cost-effective care so that they can then recommend what should and should not be offered to individuals. We'll talk more about that, I guess, when we come back.
Yeah, can we do that? And let's get your take on that. Is this going in the right direction from your experience as a medical professional? We'll be right back. Dr. Julie Penick. Dr. Julie Penick is with us. PenickHealthcare.com. PENICK healthcare.com. Dr. Penick, the national agenda and the push toward electronic records, I've seen it. I've seen my doctor when I actually go visit him, which is pretty darn rare. It's less often than once a year for sure. There's a lot of keying and there's a lot of dictation into the recording devices. They take the notes right then and there before they leave the room. And I'm not so sure I like it, only because I'm concerned that maybe in the cases when a person's in the throes of death, that someone would say, wait a minute, let me check. I don't think there's a procedure that we have for this, or it's against policy to do something heroic or something like that. What are your concerns?
About the push for the national agenda of electronic health records?
Yeah. Right.
My concern is this, that as the data is fed from these mass data sets on the types of populations. Let's take the type 2 diabetic population. And as these massive data sets are released to the Center for Healthcare Effectiveness, they're going to determine that certain measures are not cost-effective for the population across the board. Now, it might be effective for your mom or my mom or somebody else's, but if it's not demonstrated to be cost-effective for the masses, then written into that legislation is the fact that Medicare does not have to reimburse for those services. And so we're going to start seeing limitations on the way that health care is funded or provided at all. Now, here's what we've fallen victim to in this country in the first place. Used to be when you and I were children, our parents referred to it as hospitalization insurance because really they only wanted insurance with what we call catastrophic in case you ended up with a bad illness and were in the hospital. Nobody ever paid for you to run to the doctor every time your nose was runny or you had a sore throat or you sprained your ankle playing baseball, right? Your grandparents and your parents knew how to take care of you. And so then we move into the managed care setting, and everybody thinks, well, it's only a $25, $35, $40 copay. I'm going to take my kid to the doctor because his nose has been running for 3 days. I mean, really, go ask your mama. She knew what to do about that. But the reality is then we're going to start seeing that things aren't going to be paid for. Now, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, to be perfectly honest, because I think we pay for a lot of health care for people who abuse their body, do not pay attention to good lifestyle choices, and why should I be paying to take care of the smoker's lungs? I didn't pick up the cigarette and destroy his lungs or her lungs. They did. I quite honestly don't think I should have to be paying for any of that. And people say, well, you're not paying for that. Well, yeah, if my tax dollars are going into a system that funds a third-party payment system with tax dollars, then yes, I am paying to take care of that. I go through great lengths at my age, in my mid-50s. I do routine things, and I make lifestyle choices to remain at an optimum level of health as I can. That's not to say that when I go to the holiday parties, I don't want to eat all of the nice things that my friends are eating, but I don't because I know what that has the potential to do to my health. I may have a splurge every once in a while, but, we're talking rare occasions. I don't have dessert every day like some of my friends do. I don't go out to eat like some of my friends do 5 nights a week. And so I go through great lengths to take care of my body, which is getting harder and harder as I'm aging, by the way. But I make those efforts, and I don't see why the people who know they're type 2 diabetic and still want to eat cake and ice cream and, eat white bread and not take care of themselves, I don't see why I should have to participate in any system that pays for their health care. And let me use two close-to-home examples. My sister got metastatic recurrent breast cancer 6 years after her first breast cancer diagnosis, and they did her mastectomy. My sister had a conversation with me and wanted to know what she should do because there's no evidence out there to support that anything is effective in taking care of that situation. We knew from the time she got her diagnosis of recurrent metastatic breast cancer that my sister's vehicle home to Jesus was going to be her metastatic recurrent breast cancer. The only thing we didn't know is what time he would send the chariot down to pick her up. Yet in that final 16 or 18 months of my sister's life, over $270,000 were spent on her care. Now, yes, people will say she had 16 or 18 extra months, but she was in chemo every week. She lost all her hair. She was sick. She got down to skin and bones. Did she have a quality of life that was worth $270,000 to her insurance company? As her sister, people are going to say that this sounds cold-hearted. No, it absolutely was not. And I would say that my sister's case is a classic example that the majority of money spent in this country on health care is for futile cases where we know what the outcome's going to be. We just don't know what the outcome's going to look like and the time frame they're going to get there. Everyone knew that spending $270,000 on my sister was not going to change the fact that she was going to die from her metastatic recurrent breast cancer, unless there was a miracle that God decided to send down to her. But yet, $270,000 was spent on that. I love my sister dearly, and I got to spend some time with her in those 16 to 18 months. But do I think that was an appropriate expenditure of health care dollars? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And so I think that there needs to be a mechanism by which we look at across the board, are we spending healthcare resource dollars wisely? Now, who gets to make that decision? I'm not sure who's appropriate to make that decision. I make that decision for myself and my family. When my dad got all these crazy tests because he was belching, and they wanted to repeat the same test every 6 months. That went on for 2 years before I told him, I said, really, Daddy, you're 87 years old, you're going to die from something. And they kept doing all these tests, and it's indeterminate. They never find anything. And I said, you're an 87-year-old man who smoked for 69 years. Nobody's going to put you on an operating table and take out a tumor, even if there is one there. If it's a tumor there, that's going to be how you're going to go home to heaven or wherever, right? So it's kind of like, and my daddy was a great prayer, so he was a prayer warrior. He's going to go home to heaven. But I'm just saying, when we finally got the diagnosis that whatever that was they chased after for a few years and wasted all those health care dollars because he was a Medicare recipient, right? I just said to him, go to your doctor's office tomorrow and tell him you're not wasting any more of Medicare's money. If it's a tumor there, so what? Nobody's going to take you to surgery. And the doctor did not like that answer, by the way. But for the next couple, in fact, my dad passed away when he was 90. For the next 3 years, I, through consultation with my family, we made a decision to save Medicare all those dollars for tests that weren't going to change what my dad's decision was going to be anyway. But my dad didn't feel like he even had an option in that. He just said, you mean I don't have to have those tests done? My doctor wants me to have those tests done. I said, if you know what your decision's going to be based on whatever they find, then why would you do the test anyway? To confirm something that you're not going to make a different decision on? And so we saved that healthcare expenditure. And when he finally got the diagnosis, when it was a tumor that probably had been growing for 5 years, when it got big enough for us to see through his abdominal wall, and we went back and spent a little of Medicare's money on an ultrasound to prove what we already thought, and the blood test, a very simple under $100 blood test, proved that it was cancer. Everybody was shocked that my dad decided he didn't want any treatment. And my dad said, I'm 90 years old, I'm going to die of something. But had we not been the type family to make the decisions the way that we do, probably upwards from $100,000 to $200,000 could have spent on my dad's cancer that we knew was going to be what was going to take him home or away from us, right? We knew that from the time we knew it was cancer. We could have allowed that Medicare expenditure for $100,000, $200,000. That would have been for what? My dad said he'd been bald since he was 33, and he wasn't going to let chemo take away the last little ridge of hair that he had, right? And so people have to be wise. We come to think that just because there's treatments available, that we are bound to offer them and to do them, when the research clearly shows us, particularly in cancer care, that for the majority of people, huge meta-analysis came out a few years ago, that only for 2 to 3% of the people who receive chemo across all cancer types, with the exception of 3 cancer types, and one of those cancer types is the blood-borne, the leukemias. But across all cancer types, chemotherapy is only effective in 2 to 3% of the people, but 100% of the people with the diagnosis of cancer get offered all of those expensive treatments, right? And it's futile. And survival or effectiveness is determined or defined as they're going to survive 5 years past the initial day of their diagnosis. And they may, for 2 to 3% of them, they're going to do that. But what does those 5 years look like going through all those treatments? And so I do believe that there needs to be a smarter approach to how we do those things and how healthcare expenditure decisions are made. I don't want to see that be in the government's hands, but I'm concerned that because of the Center for Healthcare Cost Effectiveness has been established in legislation and in practicality now, and we're collecting data in this big push to have electronic health records so that all of this data can be shared with the big data set so that these decisions can be made. My concern is that those decisions will no longer be in the hands of, like, my family made those decisions. It will be in somebody else, some bureaucrat's hands to make those decisions for you. Good or bad, but I think that's where it's headed. Mm-hmm. What do you think
Julie,
about all that?
I
said a lot.
Well,
I always
was thinking
do,
about the
you
first
know
time. I was thinking about the first time that I saw you come into the studio, and you just, this was in Springfield, and we were broadcasting in the same studio, and you just raced in, got there like, I don't know, maybe 30 seconds before airtime, sat down, boom, you're on the air. You have an amazing amount of energy. And you've also broadcasted with me driving down the highway at 70 plus miles an hour.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend my schedule to anybody. And I just got through saying how I go through such angst to really take care of myself. I am a busy woman, But, usually when people have a crazy schedule like mine, they let them stress them out. They let that stress them. I don't let that stress me out. So I'm not suffering any negative ramifications from my schedule, that's for sure. Except today, I might say that, today I'm feeling like I got a lot on my plate.
Yeah. Dr. Penick, cancers, it seems to me, it's absolutely crystal clear to me, that in the 1950s, cancer was rare. And if someone had it, it was the kind of thing like, don't get too close because you might catch it through a sneeze, a handshake, just stay away. It was rare. Now it's everywhere. Can we talk about that when we come back? Cancer increasing at an increasing rate. Dr. Julie Penick, PenickHealthcare.com. Dr. Julie Penick's with us, PenickHealthcare.com. Julie, it's clear to me that cancer's increasing, and I believe it's increasing at an increasing rate. And the war against cancer is, to me, a sham. It's not working. It's pouring money into something that absolutely doesn't work, just like the war on poverty, just like the war on drugs, just like the war on crime. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, we don't have enough time to get into what I think is a collusion. But, so first and foremost, why do we see more cancers? As I was listening over the break to one of your advertisers, they were talking about the toxins we're exposed to. There is certainly a higher accumulation of toxicities in the environment, and most people don't even know what the toxic exposure sources that they have in their daily life. As I said, I go through great pains to avoid certain things and to take good care of myself. I don't drink out of plastic bottled water, like, not to mention any brand names like you buy at the convenience store, or I have friends who buy cases of it to drink that water at home, right? Now, drinking tap water is no better than that. One has a different source of toxin than the other. Thankfully for me, I'm on a well, or you could get a Berkey filter, right? But we live in a toxic environment by several mandates. There are certain things sprayed on your food sources in these big agricultural things. Monsanto's got the market locked up on certain chemicals that they put in, particularly two crops in this country that are affected either with chemicals or genetically modified issues is corn and wheat. What are the staples in the American diet? Most everybody's eating a lot of corn and wheat. And so those have negative impact in the human physiology. And the second is, this whole thing, John Hopkins just came out with something last week when one of our friends called me and said, did you write this piece? Because I said, if you don't want to have cancer, you just basically have to avoid sugar. Well, why do you think in a PET scan they feed you an IV with glucose and a radioactive thing? Because they know the cancer cell is going to take up the glucose, and the radiation is in that glucose solution. And so where the glucose and the radiation goes is where the cancer is, because the cancer wants to eat the glucose. And so we tell people it doesn't really matter what you eat. We push them to low fat, which was the wrong decision to make for the last 4.5, 5 decades. They've now come out and had to say they were wrong about that. And they made fun of poor Dr. Atkins and his contemporaries over that issue. And so when you go low fat, they substitute sugar to make the flavor stay good. And so now we've turned into, I was just noticing on the national news this morning about the millions and millions and millions of people, 10% of the population in the United States are diagnosed with diabetes. And there's another certain percentage of people who don't even know they have it. And so we have made people unhealthy by our sound nutritional advice that we've given them through the years. And so when you put sugar in a body that lives in a toxic environment, in an individual who doesn't know how to combat the toxicities or to detox on a routine basis, then you have the explosion of cancers that we see. And the second component of that, why do we see so many more cancers? Because cancer care became such a big money maker. Trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars a year are spent on care of cancer patients in this country. To no avail, because remember what the meta-analysis said, 2 to 3% survivability. Yeah, so put that in your pipe.
Dr. Penick, I was thinking about what you might say to some of your patients, when they come to see you. And when I've been to my doctor, I'll say, is there anything I should change? Is there anything I should be doing? Should I be taking vitamins? No, just keep doing what you're doing. I can't imagine you saying that to your patients.
My patients don't even have to ask. There's a sign that one of my patients wants to put in my office. This is not a bakery. I don't sugarcoat anything. If you want my opinion, that's exactly what you're going to get. They don't even have to ask, because if they come to me and they want to know how to optimally approach their daily lifestyle for preservation of health, I'm more than happy to read them the Riot Act. And sometimes they'll say, all I really wanted to know, was there an herb to take care of this problem?
Dr. Penick, it's always a pleasure being on the air with you. Thanks so much for spending your time with us here at usaprepares.com. I hope you get a chance to make it to the farm on July 6th for our little event that we're having with the instructors. Thanks again so much for being with us. Coming up next, John Ragan. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Blissed? Here we go. Hour number 2 of usaprepares.com. Dr. Norman Shealy, I talked with him just before the broadcast. He has just returned from a whirlwind tour, and he's on his way out again very shortly, probably within minutes. And because of that, he was unable to be on the air with us. I didn't know it until about 2 minutes before broadcast time. And Dr. Julie Penick had been arranged by Dr. Shealy to sit in for hour number 1. And John Ragan is with us for hour number 2. Thanks so much for being with us, John Ragan.
Good morning, Vincent.
Hey, John, I gotta talk about loyalty for just a couple minutes. Loyalty is really, really important to me. And I am very loyal to those around me until they're not loyal to me. Or even worse, if they're not loyal to someone who's part of usaprepares.com. John Ragan, you are among the most loyal of loyal people I know. You really, really are. And you're there, and you make sacrifices, personal sacrifices, to that end. And I want to thank you, and I appreciate it, and I want to congratulate you. It's not common that people are loyal. Mrs. Finelli and I have been watching a Netflix series called House of Cards. And what it depicts is what Washington, D.C. is like, what Congress is like. And loyalty is almost non-existent. People will sell out their family and their friends for their own personal gain, which is something that we've been saying on this broadcast for years. We're saying that politicians are weak. They are so weak that they will tend to neglect their wives and their children, or their spouses and their children, for their own personal pleasures. And if you want to see what I'm talking about, I'm calling House of Cards a documentary on Congress. It's really fiction, but I believe it's absolutely accurate. It's just the names are changed to protect the guilty. I really mean that. So if you'd like to participate in a homework assignment, now there's a lot of sex in it, and I don't approve of it, and there's a lot of vulgarity, and I don't approve of it. However, I believe that it is representative of what is really happening with the filth that permeates the United States government in the District of Criminals. John, there's some noise in the background here at my end. There are backup alarms going on. There's excavation going on. Heavy equipment's here at the farm. And right outside the studio windows, there's excavation going on. And we're building a barn. And I mentioned before, this is the first day that it's overcast. It looks like it's going to rain at any time. But this is the first day that it hasn't rained seriously for weeks. It looks like a period of 1 month we will have possibly. We had 1 day of no rain, but rain every day for the last 3 weeks or so, except for 1 day. here at the farm. We're unable to cut our hay because the ground is wet, the grass is wet, and it's serious. But it looks like right now there's a narrow window where we can excavate for the foundation and the footer for this barn. And the reason I'm saying this, many reasons. One is I have not applied for any permits whatsoever to build this barn. And it's not like it's a small barn. It's 120 feet long. It's 40 feet wide. There's going to be a concrete truck after concrete truck coming in here to bring concrete and rebar and other materials. We've been staging this for a while. I bought a used barn or a portion of a used barn from a farmer in Arkansas, and I did that to save money so I could put more money into the concrete walls of the barn. So I'm going to build a very substantial barn, but a lot of the other materials like the trusses and so forth are used, and the steel siding is used, but it's going to be a substantial barn with 4-foot-high concrete walls. So I haven't contacted or contracted with any government bureaucrats, inspectors, nor officers to submit plans, drawings, or anything else. I'm just building the barn. And I'm not going to contract with them or tell them. I mean, I've made a public announcement over worldwide radio that this is what I'm doing. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because I wonder how many of you have undertaken something like building any kind of a structure on your property, let me say it a different way, on your property, without contacting the government to say, would it be okay by filling out some application to build, like a building permit, obtaining a building permit. Have you done that? When we built our house here, we built the entire house without getting a building permit. We just built the house. It took us 18 months to, get it under roof. So think about that. Why do you have to ask for permission and pay a fee and have these government minions come and inspect and detect and say, no, you can't put it there. That's too close. It's too close to this line, or it's too close to that line, or we think it's too tall, or we don't like the materials you're using, or whatever other reason. Now, not only am I going to build the barn, I'm going to run underground wire to connect the barn to other buildings on the property. I'm going to put in conduit. I'm going to do it according to the National Electric Code. I'm not going to skimp. I'm not going to do anything that is unsafe. I think the National Electric Code is correct. I agree with it. So I'm going to use conduit, and I'm going to actually build it above what the code requires. I'm also going to put in water. That means I'm going to do plumbing. So I'm not going to get an electrical permit. I'm not going to get a plumbing permit. I'm also going to put in compressed air underground from one building to another. So I don't have to have a compressor in the barn, but I can have compressed air in the barn. I'm going to put in hydrants, water, electricity, air, network, security system, all without a permit. And I think that's the way it should be for everybody. Now, I'm not suggesting that you go off and try to do something like I'm doing and get yourself in trouble. I'm just saying this is what I'm doing. Now, I don't believe any permits are required here in this part of Missouri. So I just wanted to share that with you. No one told us where we can and can't place our house. No one told us where or we can't place our barn. We as a family picked the location. We as a family are doing most of the work, except for some of the excavation and the concrete work. Other than that, we're doing the rest of the work. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, you left out another reason why the government wants its nose in your business so they can put their hand in your pocket.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because when you make an improvement, that increases the value so they can charge you more rent in the form of property taxes.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's another thing. Now, every year, the tax assessor comes around here. She just shows up. And she says, have you finished the house? And we say, no. And here's what's interesting about that. And we're not going to finish the house. When we built the house, there's a lot of trim that's not finished. And so the house is probably 85% finished. So we're paying tax on whatever they have assessed us at times 85% because it's not finished. And they just, and I certainly would not let them inside. So they're not coming inside. They're going to have to take my word for it that it's not finished. And it's not finished. It's absolutely true. It's only 85% done. And it's staying there until I decide that I'm willing to pay more to these guys. So believe it or not, we have a farmhouse that does not have paint on all the walls. Some of the walls, and we're going to have this little get-together on July 6th with some of our instructors, and some of them are going to be here for the first time. And when Joel Wallach was here, he saw that we gave him a tour, and he saw some rooms are painted and some rooms aren't painted. Some rooms have spackle on the walls, and some have some trim, and some don't have trim, and that's just kind of the way it is. And but I think it's really neat that we're not paying taxes on a finished building when it's unfinished. So here's one of the things that I think, here's one of the points. I have challenged real estate property taxes in many of the locations where I've lived. And I'll say, well, let's go through this. How did you determine this final number? Let's go through every single step that you went through. And I'll let you know if I agree with you or not, because I live there. I know the property inside and out. I know the buildings inside and out. So I want to know why you're charging or assessing this much. And we'll talk about whether we agree or not. And I have been successful 100% of the time in getting my real estate taxes lowered because I've challenged the system. And you can do it too. Now, let's say your real estate taxes are $2,000. We'll just pick that number. And let's say you can get them reduced by 20%. So that's $400. But it's $400 this year, $400 next year, $400 the year after, and the year after. Actually, it's even more than that. As they increase the taxes, the percentage that you save is the same, but the dollars you save are more. So here's the point. Where else can you save $400 year after year after year for a one-time investment of about a half hour? Where can you do that? I don't know. So I suggest you consider challenging your real estate taxes, every single one of you. John Ragan and I'll be right back. He's got a lot in store. John Ragan's with us. John, at the top of the hour, there was a news piece about fish contaminated with mercury. And it's like it's a surprise. We have to be worried about fish in America being contaminated with mercury. So my question is, where has the EPA been all of these years? And when you listen to these government minions, it just makes me sick to listen to these overpaid, underworked government minions. And they always say the same thing. We need to do a better job. Politicians say, we need to do a better job. Really? Well, why haven't they been doing a better job? Because if I had been as neglectful at anywhere that I've worked as an employee, they would have fired me immediately for carelessness, neglect, misconduct. Not these guys. Not these guys. These guys get away with it, including murder. John Ragan, what have you got up for us?
Well, just to comment on that, the rest of the story on mercury and fish, and I think it was about 5 years ago when I read about this, virtually all the fish in the United States has mercury contamination. That mercury is coming from coal-powered electric plants. Now, it's not American plants causing the problem. It's Chinese plants. Mm-hmm. So
and
the closing of our coal plants isn't going to help things. And this also kind of ties in with Fukushima. Mercury is relatively heavy if you look at its weight on the periodic table. So when you look at things like strontium, uranium, plutonium, they're not very much different in weight. So if all of that mercury is getting over here, you can pretty much bet that radiation is too.
Mm-hmm. And that was another point that I was hoping we could make, and that is that if we're concerned about mercury, that's just one toxin. And it was underreported for all these years, right? And something else that's underreported is the radiation coming from Fukushima. We posted a map on the website, usaprepares.com. I'll repost it as number 1. About all the radiation in the air, real-time monitoring of radiation. It's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. Some levels within the United States, last time I looked at it a couple of days ago, were like evacuation levels. Can you imagine? And is ABC, CBS, NBC talking about that? I don't think so. So it's disturbing to me, the lack of communication that we're getting about the serious impacts that affect our lives. And Dr. Julie Penick was on. We were talking about cancer. Man, oh man, John, cancer's everywhere. I'm trying to think of a family I know that doesn't have cancer in it. Seriously. Can you think of one? I think it's hard to find one family that's cancer-free. Right? So what's on the agenda for today, John? I'm at your website.
Well, there were a lot of items we didn't get to Monday. In fact, I threw a whole lot up there, 20 items in all. And if I were in the court making an argument, these first 18 items on that list would be evidence. The last 2, biosurveillance and billions of points, would be part of my closing argument. Okay. So we're not going to have time to go through all the evidence, but at least want to run down the list of what the evidence is. We didn't get to food fight. That's about using spy tech on the farm. The first one you can sing to Home on the Range, drone on the farm, and just checking progress, which just checking progress talks about technology, including drone tractors and self-driving tractors, just like the Google car. All this technology for tracking the growth of crops and the movement of animals. It's very Orwellian. Moving down, we've got car hacking, which we have talked about before. What's different about this article, it's from a website that's very pro augmenting humans with technology. And it says that hacking is reality, do not underestimate it. And below that, also car related, is Where Have All the Standards Gone, which you can sing to Where Have All the Flowers Gone. Talks about the manual transmission, how it's getting harder and harder to find cars with it, partially because it used to be that you got a standard for better gas mileage, and today's automatics actually give you better gas mileage.
John, you were talking about manual transmissions and automatic transmissions, and back when American cars used to get about 14 miles per gallon with an automatic transmission, you could get about 2 miles per gallon better fuel economy if you had a manual transmission. And one of the reasons for that is there's less internal friction, less moving parts, and the manual transmissions had a direct connection without any slipping between the engine and the driving wheels of the vehicle, assuming the clutch didn't slip. But under normal circumstances, the clutch did not slip, as with an automatic transmission in an American car, there was some loss of efficiency, and it typically cost about 10% of the fuel economy. Your thoughts?
And that's true, but what's important about this, you now have to put it in context of the self-driving car and hacking of cars. Because if you have a manual transmission, you still have some control over the vehicle. If those are no longer available, then you've lost control.
You're absolutely right. And not only that, very few people today, very few young people know how to drive a manual transmission vehicle. And one of the things that we did in our family was we made sure that everyone knew how to drive a tractor and a manual transmission.
And they get to be painful to drive during rush hour.
Well, yeah, depending on the amount of effort to depress that clutch pedal, yeah, it can be a challenge if you're going slightly uphill and bumper to bumper, stop and go traffic. I've been there. I used to drive my AMX. I still have it, which had a really strong clutch, and it was tough sometimes in traffic, but we did it anyway. I had a Jeep, 1954 Jeep with a really stiff clutch, and I have a big farm tractor with a really stiff clutch. So, but we can do it, right, John?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. What's next?
Let me run down the list. Remember Firefox, which is reference to a movie back in the 80s where Clint Eastwood went to the Soviet Union and stole a plane that was controlled by the mind. Well, that's coming into reality. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Gecko Man. Talks about a suit that people can put on and climb buildings, versus Insecto Man talks about another pair of arms that can be strapped on. The next is talks about a Facebook listening feature where Facebook will listen into what's going on TV, music-wise, and put up posts for you. Google 3D talks about 3D scanning sensors for tablets that maps inside of buildings. So you talk about street map on steroids. And Vodafone confesses. Talks about the existence of secret wires that allow state surveillance. So that was the evidence leading up to where this all is leading. Because, and I picked these because I don't want you to think, this is just John Ragan got a hold of some Colorado cigarettes and is thinking about what could possibly happen. No, this is what is going on. Under biosurveillance, this talks about a proposed national health security strategy. And the deadline on comment for this was May 21st, so that is passed. But further down the article, it talks about the National Strategy for Biosurveillance. It's from July 2012. And biosurveillance is defined as a process of active data gathering with appropriate analysis and interpretation of biosphere data that might relate to disease activity and threats to human or animal health, whether infectious, toxic, metabolic, or otherwise, and regardless of intentional or natural origin, in order to achieve early warning of health threats, early detection of health events, and overall situational awareness of disease activity. So we are talking about monitoring everything in the biosphere, plants, animals, humans, because it's a matter of national security. And that's the government side of it. The billions of points talks about all this big data gathering by companies, and a lot of this is brokered in order to better market to people, because they know more about you than you know about yourself. It's kind of like, yeah, go ahead.
You're absolutely right. On the way home from Ziggy's, I got a lag bolt in a tire, which is, my question is did someone intentionally put a lag bolt where I couldn't see it and I backed up over it and got a flat tire on the way home really, really late at night? Was that intentional? But here's the really interesting thing. as I search the internet, I am getting lots and lots of ads popping up about tires. Now, I have not searched for the purchase of any tires. Are they reading my mind that that's something I need to consider, or what? So I'm getting ads that are targeted to things I am doing based on my behavior. There's no question about it. So you're right. And I remember back in the 1980s, like 1984, 1985, where a vice president of marketing was at the bank where I was employed, and he was talking about tracking customers' purchases by what they bought, where they bought it, and when they bought it on their credit cards. And it was going on back then for sure. I was there. First-hand experience. I know it's true. So we were tracking customers back then, not in my department, but in the marketing department. That was many, many years ago, about 30.
And it does talk about banks using that too. Based on your situation, if you've got financial problems, when you get online, you may see an ad for a subprime loan. If, on the other hand, you're doing well, you may get an ad for a premium credit card.
Mm-hmm. So they are tracking us at an increasing rate. It's unbelievable, the databases that are maintained on our behavior. You know, I was talking to one of my friends who lives across the Atlantic, and we were talking about cell phones. He said, "Vinny, you got to get rid of your cell phone because they're tracking everything." And John, I mentioned this, and I want to mention it again so that our class can think about it. When we have our little event on the July 6th celebrating Independence Day here at the farm with our instructors, they're going to see a sign on the door that reminds them cell phones are not allowed in the house. Now, the reason for that is because the camera's on the front of the phones, the camera's on the back of the phones. And on Monday, at the meetup, I stopped what I was doing. I was on stage. I stopped what I was doing. I picked up my cell phone, and I stood in the middle of the room. And I said, okay. And I rotated 360 degrees, slowly, very slowly. And when I made the full 360 the first time, I said, that's one. And I did it again, and I explained that what I just did with my cell phone, had my camera been turned on, is I would have videoed everything that was going on at that time at Ziggy's. Every single person would have been videoed as I did a 360-degree rotation twice in the middle of the room, very slowly, as I acted as if I were on the phone, taking a phone call in the middle of my monologue at Ziggy's. So I just want to share with our class that your camera and your microphone can be turned on at any time without your knowledge. And it has been proven. And we've discussed it on the air. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that. So please continue.
I guess to even take another step, back when I was growing up in Southeast Texas, I don't know what it was like where you were, it was pretty common in conversation sooner or later that would come up that money is the root of all evil.
The pursuit of money.
It's the love of money, which I found out a few years later. You know, I was very young and hadn't gone through a bunch of Sunday school classes that talked about some, more adult-type topics. Well, it's the greed that, the lust for things that leads to the problems. Mm-hmm. Well, from that, you can take the attitude that, it's not money that's the problem. It's what you do with it, what's your attitude about it. And we can look at technology and we try to apply the same standard. It's not the technology that's good or bad. It's what you do with it, whether it's a gun, a car, or a computer. But there's another level beyond that, because we live in a fallen world. And this technology being used in the fallen world And it looks like when you start doing more and more research that this technology was introduced to mankind by fallen angels, which explains a lot too, that for whatever good you can get out of this technology, there's many, many times the destructive power that can be used against people with this technology. The weaponization of all of this is always a part of the equation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And John, it reminds me that if someone installed a camera in a person's house without their knowledge, or in their bedroom, or in their shower, that would be illegal. But not what they're doing. John, I've just got to mention this, that I just put a post on the website. You know, Hillary wants to be president, and she's foul-mouthed. I just find it revolting that anybody would support Hillary Clinton for president. She's like the worst thing that could happen, next to what just did happen with Barry. So there's a post, foul-mouthed Hillary, and on the website. So please continue, John.
And if you're talking about how cell phones can be used to spy on you and all that, but it's very difficult to get by without using one because there's so much convenience in that. And it's been that way for a long time. You think about farming before the automobile. When it was time to get produce to market, you had to hitch up your horses and go down to the town and do your delivery and then go back to the farm, and you're very limited on how much you could take and how long it took you to get there because the horses could only go so fast. Well, then with the internal combustion engine, you now have these trucks that you could load up with more produce, and you could drive faster. You could make more trips in a day. So if you embrace the technology, you're able to do more at a lower cost. And if you didn't embrace the technology, you couldn't compete. So the ultimate answer is to not play the game, which involves sacrifice. And the example in modern-day America would be looking at Amish communities. You know, they have chosen to keep their religion and their families intact rather than turn to all the modern conveniences of what the world has to offer. And I believe that the rest of us are going to be facing those choices sooner than we think.
John, let's talk about. You've been to the farmhouse, and I had the opportunity to buy kitchen cabinets from the Mennonites who were not using electricity to build cabinets. I could have bought them from Home Depot. I could have bought them from Lowe's, or I could have bought them from another company that makes cabinets in the area. And I chose to buy them from the Mennonites. And they built our cabinets without electricity whatsoever, including the lighting. The lighting that they used was gas lamps. And I had them install them, and they brought a gasoline-powered compressor to drive an air-powered saw to cut the finished material here on the farm when they installed it. So they brought their own equipment. They didn't even use our electricity and would not use our electricity for their drills, and we had the same saws. No, they brought all that stuff with them. And have you seen the kitchen cabinets, John, here at the farm?
And they're gorgeous.
They're absolutely magnificent. They are better quality, better built, better finished, better wood, better everything than Home Depot had to offer, Lowe's had to offer. And these were built by hand. And they truly are very, very well made. So what I'm saying is we can go back. We can. It will just take a little bit longer. And it's more difficult. But we do not have to succumb to the surveillance system. We really don't. When it comes to washing my car, I am going to wash it, but I'm not going to wash the license plates. I want to make it, if my license plates get dinged and dented and banged up, well, that's the way they're going to stay, because they'll be harder to read with these automatic license plate scanners. And I'm resisting the surveillance state every way I can. And tomorrow, I go to Laclede Electric because they want to know more about me so that they can post the information for the election for the board of directors. I'd like to suggest that all of you consider running for every office you can. Tax collector, assessor, everything. Do not let these government minions run unopposed. Give them a run for their money. And you don't even have to take political contributions. You can do it the way I'm doing it. Thanks so much, John Ragan. Class, above all, honesty and integrity.